Today we're going to try to talk about metaphysics. And obviously this is a very old question, but we're going to try to say something else about it, something other about it. In fact, it seems like metaphysics is something that has actually been completed long ago. Completed with the Greeks. Let's say with the question of being. Toon heon, of being qua being. And that study, the Greeks called ontology. So that they tried to say something about being in ontology, and since then it has also been about saying something about being, whether being was understood as a universal, as essence, as ego or reason or idea, will, existence or presence, in any way that being has been understood, or substance, etc. It seems to me, though, that one of the things that's been overlooked in ontology is that being and unity imply one another. So, as Aristotle says, if being and unity are the same and are of one nature in the sense that they are implied by one another, as principle and cause, etc., etc. So being and unity imply one another. This means that ontology maybe is not really the subject of metaphysics. Rather, metaphysics should be understood as also, shall we say, henology, from the Greek hen, tohen, which means the one. Unity. So maybe metaphysics should really be understood as ontohenology, not just ontology. Then, if being and unity imply one another, the question of metaphysics would be to illuminate the implications of unity for being and of being for unity. That is, then, what is possible or necessary or a problem for ontohenology. This means that there would be, if you will, an entirely new field in the history of philosophy, or at least one that has not been taken up very much, the study of unity qua unity. Tohen heihen. And we should probably still call this metaphysics. But unity and being are and are one. How so? How so? In fact, metaphysics seems to understand the unity and being of unity and being in terms of time. That is, the way in which things are one is temporal. Unity and being themselves are taken to be understood in terms of time. If this is the case, just to sketch things out very quickly, then the study of metaphysics would be not only that of being and unity, but also of time. So, shall we say, ontology, henology, and chronology, or ontohenochronology. Time, however, would not necessarily be simply something that could be translated into, shall we say, the language of motion, as a measure of motion or change. Nor merely understood in terms of past, present, and future, earlier and later, eternal or not, presence or absence, nor as a now series, nor in terms of subjective experience or objective experience, some kind of objective criteria that we could measure things by, nor some kind of form of intuition or horizon simply of ontology. If that's metaphysics, however, onto, heno, chronology, then we might also ask, what does time imply? And the answer seems to me to be aspect. So if anything is temporal, it's also aspectual. Being in unity, then, imply time and aspect. If that's the case, then we have a new definition of metaphysics. Onto, heno, chrono, and the study of aspect, let's call that phenomenology. Onto, heno, chrono, phenomenology. It seems to me that with those four determinations, we have the full-blown understanding of metaphysics as the study then of being, unity, time, and aspect. So, what is aspect? It is not visual or dimensional or spatial. It's not some kind of face or form or side, nor simply a function of sensation or representation or conceptual understanding or perspective, nor merely a possession or quality, nor reducible to time, as if we didn't actually need aspect, but we could just reduce aspectual questions to temporal ones, because aspect is the way in which something is at any time whatsoever. In this way, it is the implied other of time and being in unity, of course, as well. So, now that we've sketched out in very, very general, rough terms what metaphysics is, let's talk about being, unity, time, and aspect in particular. Being first. What is that? It's probably not simply a thing, nor just a universal, or even the most universal of universals, even more universal than universals. It's not absolute, nor transcendental, nor is it a genus, as we know from Aristotle, from the Greeks. It can't be a genus because then it couldn't be predicated of its proper differentia. In other words, if being was a genus and beings were also, then being would have to be wider than the genus and its differentia. That's why Aristotle calls it a universal. It can't be a concept, nor merely an attribute or quality, nor merely the logical copula or formal notion, nor can it be simply a word or a thought, nor simply the position of a thing, nor its existence, nor simply its presence, nor merely their opposite. So non-presence, absence, withdrawal, etc. What is being? Being is that which unity implies, and which is implied by unity. So what is it? Let's call it an implication. This way, we don't resort to the economy of genus and species, or universal in particular, nor of concept and object, quantity and quality, etc., etc. Being is implied. It's an implication. As is unity. So unity, then, would not be anything like a number, nor a time, nor essence. Rather, it would be implicated in things. Now, this doesn't mean that it couldn't be translated into the language, for example, of reference, nor into the language of ontology, of being. But if unity is as implied as being, it's because we want to understand how beings are and are one. And being would be implicated in this history of unity as well, and in the translation of being and unity into the history of philosophy as metaphysics. In other words, into the understanding of being and unity as true or false, real or not, existence or essence, presence or absence, universal concept, etc. So we need some way to understand being and unity as they imply one another, and therefore as implications. But they need to be, if you will, more universal than any universal, more conceptual than any concept, wider than any being or unit. That's why we're calling them implications. As we're also going to see, it seems to me this word, insofar as it indicates how being and unity are, gives us a clue to what they are. In other words, instead of understanding being and unity from what they are to how they are, we're going to understand it the other way around, from how they are, insofar as that determines what they are. And of course, being is also implicated in itself, if it's an implication, just as is unity. Being would be implicated in unity, in itself, and in beings. Metaphysics, then, if being and unity, and therefore also, of course, time and aspect, are implications. If these are all implications, what is metaphysics then? Metaphysics is the study of being and unity, time and aspect, insofar as they are implications. In other words, metaphysics is the study of implications. So, not just being, but unity. And unity not before or after being, but implicated, co-implicated, co-implied with being. Being would be one, like unity. Just as unity would be, as would being. They would imply one another. So metaphysics would study the unity of their being and the being of their unity. Anything also, therefore, that was or is and is one. Anything, a piece of paper, a person, a watch, an idea. Anything that is and is one. Because, of course, it makes no difference to say that something is and to say that it is one. One man, and this is a man, is effectively the same. So the addition or subtraction of being or unity doesn't change what something is. Nor whether it's present or absent. Thought, whether we think it in one way or another. So unity, much the same as being, would be studied by metaphysics, and metaphysics would say much the same about unity as being. Therefore, it would be possible, if you will, to do an entire history of philosophy as metaphysics, studying being and studying unity. We could go back through the entire history of philosophy and examine what philosophers thought being was, and see how, if you will, what they were thinking was also unity. Or, if you will, implied the thought of unity. So unity couldn't be a genus, just as being couldn't be a genus, nor simply could it be a unit or unification, nor an object or a concept, a predicate or attribute, etc., etc. Nor could it be a number, essence or existence, the whatness of a thing, nor simply the logical function, nor place or relation. So we would still have to work out exactly what we mean, if you will, by being in unity, but we know already what, somewhat, they are not. So too, it seems, with the completeness, or shall we say, the totalization of unity. It couldn't be simply a question of totalizing or unifying, gathering, etc., etc. But if unity is implied, just like being, then it would also be implied in things. And these things probably shouldn't any longer simply be called beings or unities, because beings seems to give some privilege to being, just as unities or units would seem to give some privilege to unity. So if we're going to call things like being and unity, time and aspect implications, maybe we should call the things in which they are implied, things like watches and paper, people, ideas, etc., maybe we should call them just things. So what about time? Time implied in things. How is time implied in things, if it's an implication? It's probably not simply past, present, and future, as we said, or nows, etc., etc. But, if you will, time seems to be the way in which things are one. In other words, the way in which being and unity, or the being and unity of things, is. And that seems to be ultimately a question of presence and absence. So the way in which a thing is present or not would be its time. And its aspect, the other of time. So the way in which things are at any time, or at one and the same time. Aspect, then, would not be a question reducible to perspective, or point of view, or appearance, or grammar, nor simply reduced to time, but as the other and implied other of time, the way in which things are so that they might be present or absent, completely or incompletely. So if presence and absence characterizes the way in which things are temporally, completeness and incompleteness would characterize the way they are aspectually. In this way, it's possible to translate the temporal determinations of a thing, for example, into questions of now or not now, now and then. And similarly, it's possible to translate aspectual questions into the continuous or discontinuous, the repeated or not. But these are translations of, it seems to me, completeness and incompleteness with respect to aspect. Also, it's possible to translate aspect into questions of perspectives, of facets, adumbrations, modes, modalities, etc. But that overlooks, if you will, metaphysical aspect, that which is studied by ontohenochronophilosophy phenomenology, or what we'll just call metaphysics for short. The task then is to illuminate things insofar as they are one, complete and or incomplete, present and or absent. And therefore, perhaps to also illuminate illumination, and maybe also to illuminate ourselves as illuminating. And of course, the history of metaphysics would be implicated in this work that we're going to be doing, that we must do with the history of metaphysics. So to illuminate things metaphysically would mean also to illuminate metaphysics, that is, the study of implication. So whatever it is, it's probably not just a quest for the true or false, at least the truth or falsity of implications. What is necessary in implication, or even possible, the meaning of an implication. So the identity of concept or object, thought and thing, original and copy, presentation or representation, experience or expression, nor description, nor determination of the determinable or indeterminable, commensurable or incommensurable, meaning or meaninglessness, nor merely translating implication into presence, so that what is implied would be merely that which is present as implied, or absence as implied. No, this is obviously much too easy. But rather taking up implication and the way in which implications are implied, not simply present or absent. Therefore, it may not be possible for us to make a claim that what we're doing is science in the traditional sense. But maybe we'll say what we're doing is the study of metaphysics, which is not to say, therefore, that we're doing non-science or nonsense. Nor does it seem, when dealing with implication, to be a question of answering some question or solving some problem or resolving some contradiction, nor simply that of a paradox or aporia or amphibole or ambiguity, nor merely translating implication into some kind of certainty, even the certainty of uncertainty, but rather taking implication seriously, if you will. And this, seems to me, will have effects for it seems to me will have effects for ontology and ethics, aesthetics, in fact, for philosophy in general. So the study of implication would not merely be reducible to a linguistic question or a semantic issue, nor merely reducible to conventional or logical or psychological movements from the implicative to the implicatum, for example. In other words, it's not a question of determining or deciding upon the meaning of an implication or fixing an objective validity or norm or normalizing implicative behavior in utterance or appearance, thought, etc. In other words, reducing implication to the necessary or the possible. It seems to me rather the question is the extent to which we can think implication, if you will, as a problem of what is only implied. So in the traditional sense, shall we say, prior to the necessary and the possible. Although, as we'll see, it's not really prior. And so what will we illuminate? We'll illuminate, or seek to illuminate, implications, and that and how we illuminate ourselves and are illuminating. In this sense, it won't really be a question of knowing ourselves, especially if we turn out not to be a rational animal, a thinking thing, a subject in any sense, a consciousness or self-consciousness, nor something like an effect of nature or God or another cause or forces or mind or will or an effect of something else. No. So the question then becomes, in the study of metaphysics, how are we to study that which is only implied, this problem? If we're not just a self or mind, soul, body, subject, anthropos, subjectum, ego, Bewusstsein or Dasein, nor merely translating us, the ones who are doing metaphysics, who illuminate, seek to illuminate implication. If we are not merely an object of psychology or biology, anthropology or physiology, history or sociology, nature, culture, ontology, obviously because we're now in the realm of onto-heno-chronophenomenology, nor merely epistemology, so we couldn't be taken merely as thinking things, nor merely some kind of being among beings, nor merely is this a question then of essence or existence, of units, of the unity of units, nor merely of the presence of ourselves to ourselves, so of self-presence, or some kind of representation, at least insofar as our being would be implied in us. At that point, if it's not present, if we are not present to ourselves, as the one illuminating and doing metaphysics, we can't think of ourselves as present or self-present, nor merely absent. So how are we going to then illuminate metaphysics? Obviously, not as a lamp or a light would illuminate things, but nor are we merely going to get, if you will, an empirical understanding of an object, nor merely a conceptual one, because if we're dealing with implication, then we can't have, if you will, a simple concept of an object. But this is not something to be corrected when dealing with implication. It's not our fault, nor can we merely seek to illuminate or bring to presence the essence of implication. Let me suggest then that the Greeks had another way of thinking about us, another name for us, in fact. An older name than the one we usually associate with the Greeks, namely an older name than anthropos or aner. The Greeks called us, naming this illumination, they called us phos. Phos, light. This was a poetic name for us, but we're going to take it as the name for us as illuminating, implication. So, not merely us as dead or alive, mortal or immortal, natural or artificial, nor merely as masters and possessors of nature, nor merely as knowers or thinkers, rational animals, living creatures, which have speech, etc., but phos. That is, us insofar as we shed light on things, not because we switch ourselves on and off, but if we can switch ourselves on and off, it's because we're Phos. And therefore, we will try not to rush to translate this understanding of ourselves as Phos into the language of the natural or human sciences. Rather, we'll try to think how we are Phos as one. So the name for us, insofar as we are one, temporally and aspectually, will be Phos. This name, it seems to me, marks, to a certain extent, the way in which we will attempt to take up the task of illuminating implications. That is, doing metaphysics. Whether we're successful or not. And therefore, bringing implications to light will not merely be a question of bringing them to presence, nor leaving them in darkness, not simply showing or knowing, determining or understanding, conceiving, constituting, thinking or seeing with the eye, or grasping with the mind alone. The task will be to illuminate implications, therefore, as problems. What I've tried to do is simply introduce certain ways of thinking about metaphysics. I understand that these are not, if you will, necessarily the ones that we've known traditionally. Obviously, these things will have to be worked out in the coming weeks. The way in which we are going to take up the task of studying being in unity, time, and aspect. The way in which unity is the other of being, or aspect the other of time, if you will. The way in which these are implications, they imply one another. The way in which the science, or what we can't call a science, what we have to call a study, if you will, of implication will study problems rather than that which is merely necessary or possible in implications, and the way in which we, as Phos, as the one illuminating things in this study, will illuminate metaphysics, things, ourselves, and illumination. At least that's the task. Now, whether or not we succeed or not, that may not be so much of an issue. I guess the question really is the extent to which we can take up this problem. And so that's what we'll try to do.